views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. Over the last 15 to 20 years, the city split many New York City high schools into smaller schools under the theory that smaller is better and that this format would help the city keep better track of individual students if they attend smaller schools. While the effect on specific academics of that movement can be analyzed and debated, tonight's guests claim that the movement toward the so-called New Century schools has left smaller schools behind when it comes to public school athletic league PSAL funding. In fact, they say the funding of high school sports in New York City public schools has become a civil rights struggle because they claim inequities in that funding overwhelmingly favors schools and teams with white students over those students of color. In addition, they point to the 38,000 high school students who have no athletics at their schools, and they say it's unacceptable. These are disturbing allegations for sure. We're going to examine them through our program this evening. The phones are open, so if you'd like to weigh in with questions or comments, please call in at 718-960-7261 or email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org, and we read them on the air during a future edition of our program. Okay, so for the here and now, a dean of International Community High School in the Bronx and founder of the Small Schools Athletics League, director of NYC Let 'em Play, it's David Garcia Rosen. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Thank you for joining us. And a student at the International Community High School and a student leader of NYC Let 'em Play, Fatou Boye. Good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
David, let's start with you. As I understand it, you were the founder of the SSAL, the Small School Athletic League, and at that time it seemed like there was a healthy concept, a healthy idea. Many small schools participated, and now we're in a situation where that league really doesn't exist, and you and others are saying, well, wait a minute, we've got a big problem here. How did we go from that healthy small schools league to a case where we have 38,000 38,000 public school students not able to play sports?
So I've been in the New York City Department of Education as a teacher and dean for 17 years, and in 2011, I got fed up with watching students drop out, make bad decisions, and I knew that these were the same students that were asking me for a basketball team, a baseball team, a soccer team, and when I would call the Public School Athletic League and say, like, hey, I teach over here at a high school, we want a soccer team, we want a baseball team, they would say no, due to budgetary constraints we can't do it, small schools can't sustain teams, there's not enough coaches, you don't have a soccer field. It was the league of excuses and no.
And that's then just in their behalf, because you didn't fit into the model that they had with, of course, many of our big schools, and then when they, as I mentioned, broke up the schools, they never really considered what are we going to do with this situation.
Right, and that's been the problem for the 17 years, is that they've never made adjustments. They've just made excuses as to why they can't provide every student with equal access to high school sports. So me and a group of principals said, you know what, we're not going to ask the PSAL for teams anymore. We're going to make our own league. Now, the Referee Association said it couldn't be done. The PSAL said it couldn't be done. Everyone was like, this can't be done. We started with 8 teams at 8 schools in 2011. When we finished after 3 years, we were at over 40 high schools, 100 teams playing baseball, softball, soccer. And at that point, the New York City Council put $825,000 towards the league. And at that point, the PSAL said, we'll take that money and we'll take the league.
In other words, if there's almost $1 billion going into that, we would say, well, if you're going to fund it, we'll handle it. Okay, so now they would ostensibly take it over and implement and operate the league.
Right, and the agreement was between the council And the DOE last year was that they would continue the league with the mission and the vision, and all the schools that played would continue to play. And then this September, what happened is out of the 84 teams that expected to play this year from last year, only 24 were granted teams. Out of the 176 that signed up after that million was allocated, only 27 actually got granted teams. So the PSAL took the money, misappropriated it, and started denying teams just like they always have.
Misappropriated meaning they didn't use it for what it originally was.
Exactly.
Do people in the city council say, well, wait a minute, we put this money across and we wanted this to be for this, and now it's no longer being used for that? Presumably that would have come up?
That's exactly what's happening. When the city council members, I mean, these guys have been protesting outside of City Hall for 3 months.
So as of September, how many schools are without?
So there was 84 that played last year. 24 actually got teams this year out of the
84. You had said.
Well, no, out of the 176 that signed up.
Wow.
Only 27 got to play because we expanded every year. We were going to do a big expansion this year.
So what do those young people do for athletics?
Well, now once again, they're part of that large group of students. So here in the Bronx, in the fall, there was 10,000 students who were at a high school with no sports in the fall.
No sports.
In the spring, there's 10,000 in the Bronx with no sports in the spring. Citywide, 38,000 in the spring. These numbers are crazy.
So they go home every day or at the end of the day, rather than practicing with the team or playing sports, or even those who come out to root, or the community that it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist, and the DOE continues to make excuses. They use fuzzy math to make it look like the problem's not as grand as we're saying.
Is the answer more funding, or is the answer simply allocate the funding that you've already received?
Look, more funding's great, and the mayor actually is proposing another $4 million for the PSAL this year. But if we don't address the systems at the PSAL that grant 44 teams to one high school and then tell another high school there's no money, then we're just throwing more and more money into a pot that isn't equitably distributed, and isn't equitably distributed in a way that the schools with white students get more funding, and the segregated students, the 70,000 students at a segregated high school, are left begging for sports crumbs.
I was actually going to leave the notion of ethnicity aside for the moment, so we're going to get back to that part of the story, but let's bring in Fatou into the discussion. So you are from another country. Yes. You're from Senegal. You came here and you play soccer.
Yes.
And are you playing high school soccer now?
No.
And why is that?
I have no high school sports right now because, like what Davis was saying, the PSAL take our leagues away and not funding sports in our schools, and schools that have students that are most likely like us, which is Black and Latino students.
And so, this is going to be a fascinating answer. I know what the answer is going to be. What do you do every day instead of playing high school sports?
Well, I go hang out with friends. Sometimes that could lead to making troubles, and sometimes I do some other things that are like crazy.
Right.
That
should I ask you what those things are? I shouldn't ask.
No.
I don't even want to know. But I thought you were going to tell me because there's a whole series of protests going on. Now, don't you do that as well?
Yes, we protest every Wednesday after school.
Every Wednesday. I thought you were doing it every day. So every Wednesday, what do you do?
Every Wednesday, we actually just get out of school, run to the train, and go to City Hall, near the DOE building, or like in the Broadway side, and protest, yelling out until we lose our voices, telling the chancellor we want sports, the mayor, or those council members. And
council members who walk by, or other official people, or others, do they stop and talk to you, and what is their reaction?
I mean, some of them were like, they stop, talk to us, oh yes, but I support you guys, and this. But most of them, they just like talking. They be like, oh, I support you guys, and this and that, I believe in civil disobedience, and this is the right things to do. But then after that, we don't hear back from them anymore.
I don't know if you're the right one to ask, and we'll ask Mr. Garcia-Rosen if, in fact, this is true, but how many students are in the school, and how many would or could play sports if sports were available in that one school? Do you know the answer to that? Maybe not.
I mean, the number of students at the school is about 420.
Yeah.
And at the peak of the Small Schools Athletic League, when we had baseball and soccer and softball and volleyball, I would say 1 out of 4 students in the school participated.
So you had 100 students.
participating in teams and winning championships. These guys won the co-ed soccer 3 years in a row and the baseball 2 years in a row. I mean, have you ever heard of a league where you win the championship and then the next year you're not allowed to play in the league? That's what the PSAL did.
I don't even want to go there because to me, I mean, winning obviously is wonderful, but we're not here because everybody's not going to win. The idea is to get them to participate. Let's just go back. So you've got 100 people, 100 students in your school who are not getting a chance to play athletics, and you're saying they just hang out all day.
Yeah, that's probably what they've been doing, and it affects our school in a lot of ways because it increased dropping out of schools. It increased students getting pregnancy. It increased violence.
You believe that to be true?
Yes, I believe that to be true. And it also increase students from not having a good attendance and students from not being in a violence or doing things that are really violent.
I wanted to ask you about this notion of attendance because in my own research it seemed that the small schools athletic league, or in some of the quotes you had made to media, the notion of this was fewer requirements to participate, that students could participate outside of what, frankly, the PSAL rules might be. In other words, they require attendance every day and all those kinds of things. Isn't that a good thing to use school athletics and make sure if you want to participate, you attend?
We actually created a paradigm-shifting system that had a greater impact on dropout rates than the PSAL system. What we did was we said on the day that you want to join the team, you're on the team. We didn't look at the past. We looked at where we could bring you to in the present and future. So the day you signed up, from that point on, every 2 weeks you had to get signatures from all your teachers. You had to maintain attendance over 90%, or you were pulled off the field. So the kid that had already dropped out or had made all these bad decisions, we actually used sports to bring them back in, and we graduated kids that would have never been allowed to play in the PSAL.
Whereas in other, you're saying in traditional PSAL circumstances, they wouldn't have even allowed them in the first place.
They would have never been, and we also dropped the age requirement. So where in the PSAL, 19, you're done. If you're in your 5th year, you're done. We realized that English language learners tend to be a little older, tend to take 5-6 years to graduate at no fault of their own. In that 5th and 6th year, when they're most likely to drop out, they can't play in the PSAL. When they're above 19 and they're most likely to drop out, they can't play in the PSAL. What we did was we let them play, and I'm telling you, we graduated kids that would have never graduated if it wasn't for our baseball and soccer program.
People might be affected by Mr. Garcia Rosen's enthusiasm, but then they would be maybe surprised to find out you are not actually an active teacher or an active dean. As I understand it, you are suspended and in the DOE's rubber room. So I guess that gives you a little more outspokenness or ability to be outspoken. Why is it the case that you are suspended?
Well, on March 25th, me and about 100 students went to the City Council budget hearing, and the students did a presentation called Chancellor Farina Civil Rights Matter. Right before she was about to testify, they did civil disobedience. The Chancellor had...
What was the civil disobedience?
Well, the Chancellor had told the principal very clearly that no one was allowed to come to the budget hearing. No students, no staff. We all had to sign papers that we understood that the Chancellor said we couldn't go. A public hearing, but...
Why did she not want people to come?
Because she knew we were coming to protest her. Because when we went to protest Governor Cuomo in Albany 2 times, no one said anything. It was all great. We went on a bus. We went out there.
Because you're allowed
to
do that.
But the minute that we turned the protest towards the Chancellor, she made it very clear that. And she last year too, when we did the same thing at the budget hearing, she told the principal we couldn't go. But that year the principal let us go. This year the principal got scared.
And so what happened to you?
So the following day, they gave me a letter and the college counselor a letter who had gone as well. We were the only 2 staff that defied the chancellor's order not to go, and they put us both in the rubber room.
Let me just understand something. I mean, a lot of people believe a lot of different things. If the Department of Ed would turn their back and say, we issued a specific order and you or others, you led students to defy that order, wouldn't we have chaos for every teacher that has a passion, not even evaluating, the justification for, what you're saying or not, but couldn't we have a lot of teachers using students for a lot of different things if in fact they were to turn their back on this?
So we followed King's 6 steps of nonviolent
Martin
Luther King's 6 steps of nonviolent social change very closely. And we went through the first 4 steps of information gathering, education, personal commitment, and we spent a lot of time in negotiation and discussion with the PSAL and the DOE, and they just kept telling us we're not going to put these kids on the field. And at that point, we felt we had to enter into direct action to create a creative tension with the Department of Education to make them realize we have to put these kids on the field.
There is a video that is being created, and we lifted a piece of it, and we're gonna show maybe about a minute and a half, so people can get a sense of it. Do you feel like you've gotten somewhere, or do you think you kind of kicked yourself in the back by doing this? Had you played ball a little bit, do you think you'd be in a better place, or you think you're in a better place now?
I think we're in a much better place right now. I think our consistent and persistent direct actions and protesting and pressure has put us back at the negotiating table, where we are meeting with the Chancellor's Chief of Staff. We're going to meet with her again in a week. We met with her a couple weeks ago. I do believe for the first time the Department of Education is realizing we're not going away until every Black and Latino student in New York City has the same access to high school sports as white students.
Well, it got you on TV here, I could tell you that, because that's how I found out about it. Fatou, have you learned anything through this process? I realize that you'd rather be on the field playing sports and using that to help you grow and learn and develop and all the great things that you can get from academics. Have you learned anything through this process, even through the process of protesting every Wednesday and doing all these kinds of things?
I mean, I learned a lot of different stuff in this campaign. I have learned that things about politics and how politics work, because sometimes you could see a council member. I seen a council member that represented my district, Council Member Gibson, and as soon we started to talk to her, she decided to ignore us. She was like, "Oh no, I'm busy, I gotta go."
Really?
Yeah. So like.
And that was in the street in front of the city council?
Yes. So that is something I learned something from there, that there's a lot of politics going on.
Whereas if you were to meet somebody in the street and you would try to talk to them, you would just assume that they would be listening, but when politics gets in the middle, things seem to change. Boy, we know that from being on the show. All right, let's show this video. It's about a 1.5-minute clip. There's a lot of words that and voices that people speaking some of the things that you're hearing. So do we want? Is it entitled anything, or let them play?
Segregated and sidelined.
Segregated and sidelined. And when we come back after the video, I want to talk more about this notion of New York City schools being segregated. We'll be right back. Or take a look.
They have nothing right now, Coach.
You got to start from somewhere.
If they take our baseball, I'll protest.
You have a right to protest, and you should. That's what democracy is about.
We are fortunate to live in one of the world's most diverse cities, but our schools are some of the most segregated in the country. In fact, the lack of diversity in city schools has contributed to New York State being judged to have the most segregated schools in the nation, according to a 2014 report by the Civil Rights Project at UCLA.
I found that public schools like mine in the South Bronx don't have many sports teams, especially female sports teams.
Disproportionate inclusion of certain groups and exclusion of others.
The fact that 60 years after Brown v. Board, New York has the most segregated schools in the country.
One of the most diverse places on the planet has the 3rd most segregated urban school system in the country.
When we ignore that in the name of privilege or identity, we take a step backwards in fulfilling the American promise.
Mayor de Blasio spoke about the Tale of Two Cities. This Tale of Two Cities exists right here in the Department of Education's interscholastic PSAL sports programming.
A clear, shameful, discriminatory impact against Black and Latino students.
The dream I have for New York schools is total equality across race, class, and gender.
Some high schools receive $250,000 for sports programming from the DOE, while others receive nothing.
More disturbing was the response, these students don't deserve to play sports. I would urge to correct the inequitable distribution of athletic funds and provide all of our students with equal access to athletic opportunities and programs.
Okay, our subject tonight is the PSAL and the fact that 38,000 high school students, 10,000 in the Bronx, do not have the opportunity to play scholastic sports. Mr. Garcia-Rosen, talk to me how this became not just kind of an allocation funding issue, but is what you and Fatu and others believe is a civil rights issue. How did we go from a very specific budgetary thing to an issue that may be a lot larger?
Yeah, and I had no idea in 2011. I thought I was starting a soccer league. I had no idea that in a few years I'd be filing civil rights complaints with the federal government. What we found when we started doing the research is we started by just looking at who had sports and who didn't, and we found small schools don't have sports and the big ones do. But then when we started looking closer, we realized that the Bronx, out of the 5 boroughs, had the least sports out of all the boroughs, and Staten Island had twice as many sports per student as the Bronx. At that point, I started creating more columns in my spreadsheet to look at racial demographics, poverty levels, English language learners, and at that point is when I realized that the small schools are also segregated. They're 99 to 100% students of color. So when you look at here in the Bronx, if you look at the 5 high schools that have more than 10% white students, the average number of teams at those schools is 24, and then you look at the rest of the borough, and the average number of teams is 7. And so however you compare it, when you look at the segregated high schools, the 70,000 students citywide who go to a completely segregated high school, they have way less access to sports than the kids that go to the integrated high schools.
This may be just a terrible question. Do you think it's deliberate, or this was simply a coincidence in a matter of, well, these were the schools that were broken up because they found that those were in the underperforming areas, so they broke up those schools, and well, just one thing led to the other, and that's how it turned out. A matter of happenstance, as it were. Unfortunate as it is, and maybe statistically can be, analyzed. But so, what's your view of that?
I mean, I think the results are the same as 1950s Mississippi, but the intentions are different. So I think it's facially neutral policies that have led to disparate impact on Black and Latino students, and that is a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The U.S. DOE OCR just this October said that we don't care if it's intentional or unintentional. If Black and Latino students have less access to any activity that a school offers than white students, it is a violation of their civil rights, and that is why our civil rights complaint is active, it's strong, and we believe that if New York City doesn't make changes, the federal government will be the ones that will force them to.
Fatu, what would you like to see? I mean, I guess you've learned in this whole process that there are no magic bullets, or maybe there are, I don't know. What would be logical to you based on what you saw and what you would like to see from here on?
I would like the DOE, the Department of Education, to actually stop violating the rights of Black and Latino students. Like what David said, they are violating the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So I would like to have sports in my schools and all other New York public schools who don't have sports right now.
I'm going to just tell you, I mean, I try to be as objective as I can be, and I think the whole thing is crazy. How could you not have athletic teams for people, young people who play sports? The benefits of sports are well documented. You heard it here from a high school student about kids who are hanging out and even she herself admits maybe she's not doing the right thing all the time. And we throw 1,000 cops out there. So that's my editorial comment. I think this is nuts. This is solvable, and we should really just attend to it. So just in conclusion here, Mr. Garcia-Rosen, in your meeting, your upcoming meeting with the Chancellor or Deputy Chancellor, what are you going to lay out, and what do you specifically want to see happen at this point?
We're going to lay out what we've been laying out since 2011, which is solutions. The PSAL brings excuses, we bring solutions. So, for example, we get it. A lot of schools don't have a soccer and baseball field. Let's centrally permit all the fields that the DOE controls so we can make sure that every field is being used at every possible moment, and we could share it. We also have to make sure that schools that could demonstrate that they have enough students for a team, get a team. The days of the PSAL going behind a closed door and saying this school gets a team and this school doesn't without an explanation, those days have to end. Every school who could demonstrate sufficient student interest needs to get a team. it is unbelievable to me that once again this year we're going to give $30 million to the PSAL and let them go behind a closed door and say this school gets a team and this school doesn't.
We really only have a moment, but when Title IX came about and they were insisting that obviously more women get to play sports at the collegiate level, there was a lot of fear that that meant, of course, football and other sports, male sports, that ate up a lot of the budget, were going to have to be cut. Do you see this as a case of, well, gee whiz, some of the bigger schools or schools with sport teams are going to lose those?
Well, ironically, the Public School Athletic League was found in violation of Title IX by the U.S. DOE this year. They found that
I'm sorry I brought it up.
They found that the PSAL was not providing females equitable access to sports. So, again, PSAL violated Title IX. They've been found guilty this year. They're on investigation for Title VI, and somehow the DOE keeps saying, no, the PSAL is doing a great job. Let's just let them keep doing what they're doing. And that has got to stop. Mayor de Blasio has to put a stop to this.
When is that meeting with the chancellor? We did put the website if people want more information.
Yeah, we'll be meeting with the chief of staff next week, and we're just urging Mayor de Blasio, please solve this problem. This doesn't have to continue.
David Garcia Rosen, thank you so much. Fatu Boye, keep working hard in school and stay out of trouble.
I mean, it's not a trouble.
Oh, I realize what you're saying. Okay, folks, last week's show on drug use in the Bronx, we had a viewer comment. It was a very brief one, but summarized a lot of things about our show last week. It came from Jose A.R. on Facebook. He said the root solution is providing a healthy, life-affirming environment, maybe something similar to what we're looking for in this program tonight. If you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org. You put them on our Facebook page, as that gentleman did, and we read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Please make sure to like the Bronx Talk Facebook page. You can check out the archives at bronxnet.org. You'll find Bronx Talk on the lower right navigation bar. Now, next week, we're going to do a second part of a little high school series that we've begun, a little mini-series, and just a two-part series. We're going to have a unique gardening program that's going on at DeWitt Clinton High School that's about a lot more than just gardening, you can be sure. So that'll be next Monday night. Thanks to producer Dalia Gonzalez, director Shirley Arrieta, and Helen and Bianca and the cast of thousands. And guess what? See you next week. Good night.
I grew up in the housing projects of Cleveland. I didn't even know that life could be any better than it was. Education for me has been a way to get away from the agony of what was normal life. I want to be able to impact the community, not just look back on where I came from, but to reach back to where I came from and pull some people up with me. My name is David, and I am your dividend.
People think I'm trash, but they're wrong. Today I'm just an aluminum can, but one day I could be a stadium.
A single ember that escapes from a wildfire can travel more than a mile.